Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC-TV18 Budget Verdict. We are live across our platforms. Thank you very much to the CEOs who are joining us here this evening for the first post-budget interaction with the budget architects, the budget makers. Joining me now on stage is the DIPAM Secretary, Tuhin Kanta Pandey. Mr. Pandey, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Before I get to you about next year's target and next year's aspiration, let's talk about this financial year. How do you intend to close the gap?
This financial year, we have a target of about 1.0 lakh crore, 1.05 lakh crore if you count disinvestment as well as the dividend from CPSEs. And we have done about 68,000 crore yet, about close to 70%, about 70%. And, usually on the dividend side, we have been exceeding. In the last year, we had a dividend target of 46,000 crore and we ended up with 59,000 crore because we had certain, headwinds this year. But nevertheless, I think we would do it better than our target there. And on disinvestment, we will continue our, we will continue to strive to meet the target. Within the market conditions that we get in next 2 months.
You're smiling while you're saying that you'll continue to strive to meet the target, but what could you depend on? Could you depend on the likes of Hindustan Zinc, for instance, to be able to close the gap on the disinvestment side? Dividend, I understand, and you pointed that out quite eloquently, that you've been able to exceed, but on disinvestment, that's where the problem is. So could a Hindustan Zinc-like option come to the rescue to close the gap?
Well, I don't think that we really specifically, at least in those cases where we do minority stake sale, we really don't reveal the names and the numbers. And you know that certain SEBI norms are there, certain things are there where we don't, this thing is there. But certainly we had two pillars. One is the minority stake sale and the other one is the privatization, where we do what we call also strategic disinvestment. And put together, we have to look at different conditions and different stocks and look at, particularly looking into the interest of the minority shareholders and then act accordingly.
Now let's talk about the larger issue of disinvestment because, Mr. Pandey, this has been a cause of concern and I would say that this has been one of the areas of disappointment expressed not just last night or last evening after the budget was unveiled, but over the last few years. And I'll tell you why. Because year after year, the target has been missed and missed quite significantly. 210, 175, 73, 65, 51. And we've seen a significant decline in the targets. Now, one could argue that you're now finally putting a more realistic target in place, but what seems to be the issue as far as disinvestment is concerned? And for the benefit of this audience also, let's understand, because so much was made about disinvestment, strategic disinvestment, privatization. What should we now expect as the run rate to really realistically be?
I think let me also tell that, these last 3 years is precisely the years when we had major issues just after the budget announcements. We have, for the first year, we had COVID, and the second year we had, the Delta wave, and then third, we had Omicron and Ukraine crisis, and the Fed and the others, where, the sentiment of markets completely changed. We had also some of those big-ticket disinvestments, for example, BPCL, where we proceeded well. But in between, they were caught up in the energy transition issues, also the transition of geopolitical issues on fuel. And then obviously the bidders didn't want to proceed further, and they had to call off that EOI. So I think one of the big lessons that we have learned, of course, we have built up capacity in our department and the other stakeholders that we work with. But we do have, if you really see, 4 things that actually impinge on disinvestment targets as well as strategy. Necessarily, disinvestment strategy has to be calibrated on account of the following reason. One, the bandwidth. When we have, we had about 4.07 lakh crores of disinvestment over from 2014-15 over the last few years. And obviously, if you have disinvested certain equity, you have less to disinvest going forward. So that is one which is a reducing bandwidth. The second one is, of course, is the issue of markets. As I said, last 3 years, especially after that budget announcement, we had a major issues relating to markets. Remember, we had to do an LIC IPO last year against the major headwinds, and we were planning a 5% IPO, where the market situation became such that we had to go for a 3.5% IPO with a special dispensation from SEBI. So these are the things that we have faced. It's a quite an climate of uncertainty and challenges so far as the disinvestment is concerned. The third factor is we have keeping in mind the minority interest, which is, when we were doing ETFs over the last few years, we had a consistent, complaints from investors that there is always a price overhang. Then when they have repeatedly the issues are coming, the OFSs or the ETFs are coming at a discounted price, and which is leading to erosion of the wealth at their hands. And that was reflected also in, if you really see the market cap and the rate of return on the CPSCs on the BSE and Nifty, they were consistently falling as compared to the main BSE, Sensex or Nifty. This trend has been reversed. If you look at either you take it last 3 years put together or 2 years put together, or you take even this current year, in all these three situations, we had our CPSC index, BSE, both on the BSE and Nifty, has exceeded the main BSE and the Sensex. So to some extent, we have been able to close the gap. So I think this is a very important consideration of how we do it. It has to be necessarily a calibrated strategy. The quantum of share sale and the price at which we come has to be conditioned. Neither we should have a frequent share sales on that, nor we should have very much discounted stake sales. And I think we have to calibrate our expectations accordingly. The fourth important consideration is the process involved in the privatization. In the privatization, we have always, if you look at from the budget numbers, because you're starting your whole premise is from the budget side, the budget numbers. And my plea would be that I think more than important is also the reforms. When a particular enterprise is able to, unlock its potential going forward, I think that is a much more gain for the economy and to the enterprise. Because we are also for the stakeholders of the employees. We are for the enterprise, which includes employees, which includes general economy, its suppliers. So when Air India is disinvested, and obviously it has unleashed, a lot of other forces, economic forces and multipliers, which we would not have otherwise been able to do. You can say that the receipts to the government in that case was not very much so far as the targeted number was concerned. But we were able to have as an opportunity cost a lot of savings because the 20 crore a day, we are not able to, there's no taxpayer burden on that money anymore. So it's the same case as that of Neelachal Ispat. If you have a plant which is lying closed for so many years with workers not paid, and finally not only we are able to pay them, but also there is a great deal of capex going on of almost $8 to $10 billion in the decade in that place. I think that is unleashing the whole sort of new economic forces in that. And there is a tremendous, benefit to the employees and other stakeholders, despite the fact that in the NINL, which was done this year, we did not receive any receipt.
Logic, the economic logic for doing the disinvestment, the kinds that you just spoke of, whether it's Air India or Neelachal Ispat, is well taken. But what next? And does the government still have the appetite to go through with privatization of things like banks? Because we haven't seen the legislative changes being moved in Parliament through the course of the year. The expectation was this was a budget promise made in the last budget. So is there still appetite to go through with things like banks, etc. at this point in time? And I'm not talking about IDBI Bank because that's a special case.
No, IDBI Bank is a different case, of course, but on that point, I think it has been made clear that there is no such plan as yet, because I think that needs the legislation is not being moved.
So the bank privatization at this point in time is on hold and is not being taken forward. How confident do you feel about closing out IDBI Bank in the next few months? Because there we understand that there has been a fairly positive response that's come in from a bunch of investors.
Yes, I think we have received the initial EOIs and we expect to move it forward, and my hope and expectation is that we should be able to close it in the next financial year.
Okay. Any questions here for the Disinvestment Secretary? If you can raise your hands, I will get the microphone across to you. There's a gentleman right at the very end. We'll get to him. But if you can share with us what the pipeline or the calendar looks like at this point in time in terms of candidates that are more suitable to be taken forward for disinvestment, strategic disinvestment, particularly in the conditions that we are currently in. I would imagine that BPCL is off the table.
We have actually put it out in our website.
Yes.
That it's not off the table, but it's like waiting for a right environment to settle in. So, because the point is that there were certain reasons due to which the BPCL could not proceed forward. So not any lack of effort on our part. In fact, we had because the entry barrier. The net worth requirement was $10 billion, $10 billion in the case of BPCL. So we had sufficient bidders to start with. But I think this was such a large transaction that it was also caught up in several international issues relating to energy transition as well as Ukraine crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I am Dr. Harsev from the dairy industry. So, on one side, the government is trying to go in the route of the disinvestment for bringing in the private sector and the corporate sector for development of the country. But we have seen in the dairy industry for the last couple of decades, there have been the policies have been more lopsided towards the cooperatives, whereas the nearly half or slightly better than more than a half of the milk from the organized sector is being processed by the private sector, and half is being processed by the cooperative sector. Only last budget there have been an inclusive budget for this, wherein they have considered the shops for the private sector. Now, if this budget again, most of the shops have been given to the cooperative sector and not even a single to the private sector. If this is the disparity which is going on, we are not giving the level playing field to the cooperative sector, private sector, which is doing half of the milk processing. So I think that development could be a problem.
That's a very specific question pertaining to the dairy sector, and you're right, there was a lot of focus on cooperatives and especially self-help groups and women-led cooperatives. I don't know if the DIPAM Secretary is well placed to answer that, but if you would like, sir, take a stab at it.
No, I wouldn't like to comment on this.
Okay, I expected that. But let me understand from you, in terms of the pipeline that you're working on at this point in time, given the market conditions, given the market dynamics, how confident do you feel of being able to move on the path of strategic disinvestment? Which are the areas that you believe, or which are the candidates that you believe that you will be more confident of?
I mean, we have got ongoing transactions, and I think we are keeping, fair amount of information as and when we have progress on that side. As I said that, in our processes, we have certain candidates which are already going on at certain advanced stages where we also have demerger processes. And I think it's important to also highlight that in some cases the demergers are necessary because you have a lot of real estate which is bundled out with an operating company. And it is neither in the interest of the company's shareholders nor in the interest of the interested bidders, because they may not be interested to actually bundle up that real estate. For example, in one case, we had, say, 125 acres of land in Bengaluru, for example, freehold, which was tagged. Then I think the land value itself will be far, far in excess of, what possibly the market cap of that company. And that has to be actually for the interest of the BEML shareholders, has to be disinvested in a different way, not really as a part of the operating company, but the real value as a real estate. The same thing is true with, when we are saying that Air India house in Nariman Point, or we say that the shipping house in the Nariman Point are not really part of those transactions. It goes by that. It also means that, a huge tract of land in Vasant Vihar should not be a part of that particular transaction of Air India. So, but the only process is that when we try and do it, it is not easy to just sell off those things so easily. So we have to really demerge in a listed company initially to do that. And certain processes have to be gone through, which is, in the NCLT process in the normal case, but in this case, in the government companies, there is a similar process, which is equally, under the law, companies law, which is to be run by the MCA, which also has the similar expectations of, the creditors, the independent, minority shareholders, separate approvals, and so on. So it's time intensive. But nevertheless, that is the right way to structure and go, because the value will be discovered fairly and squarely, properly in that process. Now, given those things, that once the demerger process are through, similarly, for example, in case of NMDC Steel, we have done a demerger process out of the NMDC for a unit which was being put, and that NMDC Steel has been demerged, and now, of course, it will be listed. But we have received the initial EOIs for those NMDC Steel as well. So similarly, we have got some consulting company, we have a lifestyle company, we have a steel company here. So these are the ongoing transactions which would like them to be taken to the logical culmination. So I think it's very important for us to consolidate rather than just keep on adding to the pipeline. We would rather like to complete these cases and get those things which we have been able to do, to add to all those things that we have been able to do in Air India or NINL and so on.
Okay, so the focus is on getting the ones that are already underway over and done with before you actually add more to the list. But let me also ask you in terms of asset monetization, because once again, this is something that the government was banking on in a big way. If you could explain the roadmap as far as asset monetization is concerned, given the experience the government has seen, especially in the past year or so.
I think in asset monetization is basically, I think, is a part of that capex cycle that we want, where a lot of money which is required to be brought in upfront can be upfronted through, putting some of the core assets into, marketable things like units, either through InvITs or through TOTs and so on. And in some of the cases, the asset in, for example, in case of mining and coal and all that, it involves into really kind of a private sector investment instead of public sector investment that can come in order to, put that money into the mining and so on. So those are actually, barring a small amount of money, actually they're not really receipts as much into the Consolidated Fund of India, but they are actually money which is available for the enterprises to put in, more capex.
Right.
And that cycle is on, and I think it's in different stages. Like you had in the power side, on the road side, you had both InvITs and you had also, in fact, InvIT framework was organized, and both private sector InvIT and public sector InvIT have taken place. In case of road sector, it's happened in case of power grid, for example. In the power side, we are also talking in terms of silos.
Yeah.
We are also doing it in case of it has happened in case of airports. Some of that will be, of course, in mining and so on. So I think that is something which different ministries are working on.